Hi, this is Craig from Vinyl on the Edge of Town, your place to talk music and records. This is my first video, first of what I hope will be many. But I've been watching people in the VC do videos now for some time, and I just have so much respect for everybody who takes their time to do this. And I figured maybe I could have add something to the equation. Maybe not. But at least I would give it a try. But people like Dylan from Noble Records, Mike from the In Groove, Hannah, the Omaha Introvert. I can't tell you how many punk or post-punk albums I've purchased over the last few years watching her channel, and I figured maybe I would give it a shot. Just a little about me. I've been collecting records for going on about 40 years, ever since I was a little kid, and I've amassed quite a collection of many different styles and many different types. But I figured, what a better way to get to know me a little better than to go through my top 10 favorite albums of all time. I'm not a big list guy. I know that there are a lot of channels out there that like to do lists. I don't personally like to do lists because I really do think that music is subjective. I don't knock anybody for their taste in music, and I would hope that people wouldn't knock me for my taste in music. I have a pretty eclectic taste, but I'm sure that there's some out there who will look at this top 10 and say, "Boy, what a bunch of garbage that is." But either way, these albums sort of reflect me, my overall taste in music. And I think when you're picking your top 10 of anything, when you have such a variety of things to choose from, especially music, it's not just about the music itself or the lyrics themselves, but a combination of those two, and also where you were the first time that you heard the album, what you were doing, who introduced you to that album. Maybe it was an album that you heard from your parents when you were a kid, and it just kind of stuck with you, and now it's one of your favorite albums. Maybe it was an album that you heard at a certain moment of your life, and now it's one of your favorite albums. Even though it may not be one of your favorite genres of music, the album itself sticks with you, or the artist sticks with you because of where you were at the time that you heard it. And I find that with me, that's the case for a lot of this. A lot of this is where I heard the album the first time, what I was doing when I heard it, and certain lyrics or certain memories that have had an effect on me. So, having said that, I figured I'd go through my top 10, talk a little bit about each album, not a lot. I don't think we have the time for that, but maybe at a different time we'll break these down and go through them one by one. But this is my top 10 favorite albums. Coming in at number 10, we have Seventh Sojourn by the Moody Blues. This was the Moody Blues' eighth album, released in 1972. And this was the last album of the Moody's so-called classic years from 1967 and 1972, where they unbelievably released 7 albums in those 5 years, and all of them are fantastic. Starting with Days of Future Past, which of course has the single Nights in White Satin, which everybody knows. In Search for the Lost Chord, on a Threshold of a Dream, To Our Children's Children, A Question of Balance, Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, and culminating in this album, Seventh Sojourn. To me, this album is the best of the bunch, is an overall record. The sound, the feeling of it, it has a distinct feeling of loneliness. Even though some of the lyrics are a little more uplifting, it does sound sort of lonely and obscure, and that's something that I enjoy when I listen to it. There's also a subtle politicism in each of the songs, like Lost in a Lost World, and the not so subtle irony of I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band that always makes me laugh every time I hear it, as the last song of the album, where there is this politicism, and the band takes a step back and says, "Wait a minute, I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band. You don't have to pay attention to me." Wink, wink. This album hit number 12 in the US in 1973. And the best song on the album to me is Isn't Life Strange, which is the last song on side one of the album. This is a great copy of this album, the MoFi original master recording version of it, but there are many different versions of it that are just as fantastic sounding, including one that was just released a couple years ago, which was the remastered version of it. While not equal to it in sound, it does sound very good. Coming in at number 9, we have Fleetwood Mac, the self-titled album. Let's see if we can make it stay. Okay, we'll hold it. This was released in 1975. Some refer to this as the White Album, which I just can't stand when somebody calls it the White Album. Sorry to anybody who calls it the White Album. I do not. To me, there's only one White Album, and this one is not even all white. There is a picture on it. This was the first album that featured Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. Most casual fans of Fleetwood Mac think that this is the first Fleetwood Mac album. It is not. This was actually their 10th album. As Fleetwood Mac had enjoyed a lot of success as a blues band prior to this, guitarists such as Peter Green, Bob Welch. So the question is, why do I prefer this one rather than the more popular mega hit Rumors, which was a obvious mega smash 2 years later? Rumors is a fantastic album, obviously. It's still, to this day, extremely popular. I can't tell you when I'm in a record store how many kids and young adults I see come in asking for Rumors. There's no doubt it is a great album from beginning to end. It's also sort of known more for the turmoil that created it than the music itself, even though the music itself is fantastic. But to me, this first album, which was the first with Lindsey and Stevie Nicks, was the injection of these two talents into the mix that makes it just slightly above Rumors as far as the music goes. Whether or not it's the Lindsey Buckingham guitar solos that I prefer in this album than Rumors, or the John McVie bass lines that I prefer, I don't know. But to me, this is just the better album, and this was the first in the creation of the mid-70s California sound that Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles helped to create. This was also the first Fleetwood Mac album that I heard. I was 5 years old in 1975. I've just given away how old I am, and I distinctly remember the song "Over My Head" by the very missed late Christine McVie, blasting from my mother's 8-track player in her 1967 Pontiac Le Mans as we were driving from Massachusetts to Florida. So for those reasons, this is my number 9 album. Best song on the album is Crystal, in my opinion, which was originally written for the Buckingham Nicks album, which came out a few years before. Number 8, Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits, released in 1985. Everybody, of course, knows the song Money for Nothing. Everybody has seen the video. I remember seeing the video when I was 15 years old and thinking this is the best that they could ever do as far as computer graphics went in 1985. And now, of course, it looks amazingly obsolete, but still a great song. However, this album is much more than just Money for Nothing. In 1985, as I've said, I was 15 years old, and I distinctly remember the Cold War as it existed then. a friend of mine had invited me over to listen to records because that's what kids did back then. You'd sort of go over each other's house and do whatever, but you'd have a record playing in the background. And I remember he had a TV in his room that had the sound down. And President Ronald Reagan at the time was giving some kind of speech, even though at 15 I wasn't really paying attention, because why would I at 15? He then started playing Brothers in Arms on his record player, specifically side B, with songs like Ride Across the River, The Man's Too Strong, One World, and the absolutely exquisite title track to close out the album, Brothers in Arms. The lyrics of these, each written by Mark Knopfler, were stories of war, militarism, and its overall effect on people. And this juxtaposed with the image of Reagan in the background is something that I've always had in my head. And every time I hear this album, the first thing that pops in my head is not the movers from the Money for Nothing video moving back and forth, but the image of the militaristic songs with Reagan in the background. Though that's what I have in my head, and it's left an image in me. Coupled with the fact that Mark Knopfler is just one of the best guitarists out there. To me, this is their best overall effort. The best song in the album, in my opinion, is the title track, Brothers in Arms. You can't listen to that album and not just think it's absolutely exquisite. Number 7, Chicago Transit Authority, by the Chicago Transit Authority at the time. Chicago, as they're now known, their first album, which they had to change their name because they were facing a lawsuit from the actual Chicago Transit Authority, and they decided to just shorten it to Chicago. This was released in 1969, and this is my absolute favorite Chicago album. I classify Chicago into 3 different categories. There are the great years, which were prior to guitarist Terry Kath's untimely death in 1978. The post-Terry Kath years from 1978 to 1980, where the band just sort of floundered around, making some mediocre records. And then the post-1980 David Foster years, where he neutered the band and made them into an unrecognizable pile of mush mixed with tears. And most of those tears were mine. So why this album is compared to the billion Chicago albums that are out there, to me, Terry Kath is absolutely my favorite guitarist of all time. And a lot of people, when you look at the names of the top 10 guitarists of all time, there are some lists that I've seen where his name is mentioned in there, usually towards the back of the list. And a lot of this is because of the fact that he died in 1978, and he died so young that he's not thought of in the same vein as like a Jimi Hendrix. But if you listen to songs on this album, Terry is in full Terry mode. Songs like Introduction, Freeform Guitar, I'm a Man, show the absolute brilliance of Terry Kath. It's been reported that Jimi Hendrix, himself a fairly good guitar player, once called Terry Kath the best guitarist in the universe. I agree. And that's why this album is one of my favorite. Best song on the album, I'm a Man. If you listen to that, you can't help smile at Terry Kath's guitar playing. Next, we have Under Lock and Key by Dokken, because sometimes you just want to rockin' with Dokken. Sometimes a little heavy metal is just what the doctor ordered, and there's something about the combination of Don Dokken's soaring vocals and George Lynch's rousing guitar that set up Dokken as my favorite heavy metal band. These notoriously could not get along. They clashed and butted heads from the very early days of Dokken right until the present day. Every once in a while I read that they're still fighting in some capacity. But sorry to Lynch Mob fans or Don Dokken solo effort fans or Dawkins post-George Lynch fans, they were always better together than apart. This was released in 1985, and I prefer this one to the much more hard-rocking, but a little bit more disjointed album, Tooth and Nail, which was released 1 year earlier. With its melodic metal, it's sometimes bordering on glam. Under Lock and Key knows exactly what it is at all times. And the songs really hit home for me at the time. There were songs about lost love, first love, unrequited love, fantasy love, and It's Not Love. Certainly hit home with a 15-year-old in 1985, and I remember listening to those albums, this album specifically, when either I asked the girl out and she said yes, or I asked the girl out and she said no. There was a song for both. That's one of the reasons why I still to this day love this album. Next we have, at number 5, we have Billy Joel, The Nylon Curtain. Without a doubt, this is Billy Joel's, in my opinion, Billy Joel's best overall effort. Obviously, you know, Billy has been making music for a long time. I never thought in 1993, when Billy put out River of Dreams, and the last song on that album was Famous Last Words, that was actually be the last words that Billy Joel put on a studio album. I never figured it would be 30 years plus, and that we would never get another Billy Joel studio album, not including the classical album that he put out back in the early 2000s, I believe, or late 90s. This was released in 1982, and of course it had the songs Pressure, Allentown on it, and I remember seeing the video early on for, and of course everybody was already a Billy Joel fan by the time this came out in 1982. The album Glass Houses had preceded it, and songs like It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, You May Be Right, those were already huge radio hits. So when this album came out and the video for Pressure, with him getting sucked down by the carpet, I remember going, well, what is Billy doing? Like, what is that? But having listened to this album, and especially listening to it now, this is his most adult album, and his most complete album, where he is expressing adult fears, losing your job, love, marriage, growing old, acceptance. And it's an album that you could listen to in your early 20s and your early 50s and still sort of get the get a different version of that, depending on when you are and who you are when you're listening to it. Best song on this album to me is Laura. I just absolutely love that song. Coming in at number 4, The Spade by Butch Walker. Who? Butch Walker. Butch Walker is a fantastic musician. In the 90s and 2000s, he was known as he was a heavy metal guy. And now he is just a fantastic singer, songwriter, producer. He's produced for the Green Day, amongst others, but his solo albums have really hit home for me. And this one, to me, is one of the best. And why? It's just a rockin' good album. You can put it on when you're sad, and you get happy listening to it. You can put it on when you're depressed, and you sort of get a little more depressed, but then you get happy listening to it. The songs are very personal. Songs like Day Drunk, which is just absolutely a fantastic song with a great guitar solo in it. This has very quickly, this was released in 2011, so this is the newest album in my list, and this album has very quickly become one of my favorites, and I just find myself going to it very, very, very often. If you haven't heard Butch Walker's solo stuff, pay attention to it, take a listen to it. They're all on Apple Music. You don't have to buy the records, but pay attention to it and give it a chance, and start with this one. Coming in at number 3, we have the album Scarecrow by John Mellencamp, although I think here it was John Cougar Mellencamp, where he was trying to phase out the Cougar of the name. This was the first of John Mellencamp's Heartland trilogy, starting with Scarecrow, then moving on to The Lonesome Jubilee, released a couple years later, and Big Daddy, which was released the year after. Those are all absolutely fantastic albums, and I remember seeing John Mellencamp during the Scarecrow tour back in 1985, and he just put on a fantastic show at the time, and it sort of solidified perhaps my love for this album. I happen to also love the Lonesome Jubilee, again, which was released a couple years later. So why Scarecrow and not the Lonesome Jubilee? One reason, and that reason is the song Minutes to Memories. To me, that is John Mellencamp's tour de force. It's his masterpiece. To me, he has never wrote a song before that as good, and will never write a song after that as good. And the best part of Minutes to Memories for me is the somewhat ambiguity as to who the main characters are. It's clearly about the generational gap, but the people on the train who are delivering the narrative in that song, with an older man giving advice to a younger man who could be his son. They could be father and son. They could be grandfather and grandson, or they could be absolute strangers who are just on the train talking, with the older man giving advice to the younger man, and the younger man, as younger men do, listening with only one ear. And I have always found the message of that song compelling, and to me, that song is the best song on the album, and the reason why I put the album Scarecrow just ahead of The Lonesome Jubilee, which is also just an absolute fantastic album. At number 2, Change Everything by the band Del Amitri. Who? Again, Del Amitri. This was released in 1992. It was not a huge hit here in the United States. It was a bigger hit in the UK, where it had hits like Always the Last to Know. They would find much more success as a one-hit wonder a few years later when the album Twisted came out, which contained the single Roll to Me, which is the song that Del Amitri is mostly known for. I prefer the album Change Everything to Twisted, and Twisted is a great album, and it's much more of a hard rocking album. The song Roll to Me is not really indicative of the album itself, Twisted. And you see that a lot with songs that have singles on it, and then the rest of the album doesn't sort of match up what that single is. And to me, that's the album Twisted. But Change Everything is just a fantastic pop album, filled with lyrics of melancholy and loss, and when you're a young person or even an older person, sometimes you just want to sulk. And this is just a great album to sulk to. Lead writer Justin Currie, who, if you have never heard Justin's solo albums, including his first solo album, What Is Love For, which is available on vinyl. It's also on Apple Music. Again, I implore you to take a listen to it. He's just a fantastic writer, a great writer, and he knows lost love and heartache better than anybody that I've ever listened to. I would certainly implore everybody to take a listen. But if you want to do Del Amitri, start with Change Everything. Best song on the album to me is found on side one, track 4, which is Surface of the Moon, which is just a great song about nostalgia, going back to your hometown, going back to a former love and expecting everything to be the same, and it never is. And he compares that feeling to being on the surface of the moon, where just everything is just looks foreign. Even though this may be a town that he spent years in, it just doesn't look the same. And that's just something that struck home with me the first time I heard it, and that's my second favorite album. And number one, to me, now I sort of had a rule when I did this top 10, which is try to don't pick albums from the same artist over and over and over again, because as you could tell from my name, I'm a big Springsteen fan, and I could probably fill my top 10 with just Springsteen albums. But it goes without saying that that my number one was going to be a Springsteen album. It's just a matter of which one that was going to be. And my favorite album of all time is Darkness on the Edge of Town by Bruce Springsteen. And the E Street Band. This is an original promo, white label promo. I think I have about 15 different versions of this album. The original promo sounds great. The remastered version of it that came out just a few years ago sounds great as well. There is no better Springsteen to me than angry Springsteen. And he is at his absolute angriest in Darkness on the Edge of Town. He had just come off the biggest success of his career 3 years earlier with the album Born to Run. And Born to Run actually contains my favorite song of all time, which is Backstreets. And if you've never listened to Springsteen's Backstreets, what are you doing watching me? Go listen to Springsteen's Backstreets. But from 1975 until 1977, he was involved in a lawsuit with his former manager, and this created a disillusionment in him, which manifested itself into mostly every song on this album in some capacity or another. There's a great line in the song Something in the Night, which says, "You're born with nothing and better off that way. As soon as you got something, they send someone to try and take it away." And that is the overall theme of Darkness on the Edge of Town, the loss, the idea that you're basically Sisyphus in this world where you bring the rock up the mountain only to have it fall right when you achieve some modicum of success. It's also the album where he faced his most inner demons, specifically his parents, specifically his dad, and the relationship that he had with his father, which notoriously was not a good one. And you find that song in Adam Raised a Cain, just the anger and the delivery of the lyrics in Adam Raised a Cain is palpable, and you can't help when you hear it just paying attention. There are some artists who, when they sing, and I know that there's a lot of people who can't stand Springsteen's voice. I get it. I totally get it. But to me, when Springsteen sings, depending on the character he's playing in a certain song, you can't help but believe it. And in songs like Darkness on the Edge of Town, Streets of Fire, Adam Raised a Cain, and even Racing in the Street, you can't help believe the pain and agony and anger of which he's singing. And it made me pay attention. I remember hearing this album for the first time as a little kid. This album came out in 1978, so I would have been 8 years old. And a friend of my parents had a great vinyl collection. And I was just getting into Springsteen on my own, and I remember I had Born to Run, and I used to listen to it a lot. And this friend of my parents, he was one of these guys who would not let anybody touch his records. Only he could touch his records. And I remember going over and looking at the cover and not wanting to touch it. And I remember he took it and he handed it to me and he said, "You could take this one, but you have to listen to it and you have to pay attention." And I did. And to this day, this is my favorite album of all time. That's it. That's the top 10. I hope to deliver more videos. If you like this video, please leave a comment. If you don't like this video or you disagree with me, leave a comment. Like I said, music is subjective. These are, of course, just my opinions. I shouldn't have to say that, but I will. These are, of course, my opinions. You are free to absolutely disagree with me, but leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Again, I'm Craig. I have a Whatnot store on Whatnot called Vinyl on the Edge of Town. My first sale is actually tonight. That's the 19th, Wednesday the 19th. But come check that out as well. And take care.